Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the JMO Podcast. I am your producer, Taylor Michaels, and on this episode, we got Jimmy Bell on the podcast. Jimmy's been fishing professional walleye tournaments since the 90s on through. Now he's one of the veterans in the industry, a communicator and promoter, and he's helping young people get into fishing. If you've been hearing about these youth fishing programs here in Minnesota, well, I tell you what, Jimmy's at the tip of that spear, and he's got a lot to say about it on this week's podcast.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul Trucking is looking for skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. Long Haul values their drivers and shippers like nobody else. Their employee-owned ESOP structure has them leading the industry in pay and benefits, geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. Long Haul is a people-first company, and it shows. They take pride in giving their drivers an opportunity to have a fulfilling career, along with a healthy, happy life on the home front. If you're a professional CDL driver, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or look them up online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept.
Jimmy, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about your place in the industry.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. I've been started with this since 94, I think, was when I really got started. And the interesting part of it is I really didn't have enough confidence in myself to go do some of this. There was a time, there was a PWT trail, which was a walleye trail, and they decided to split off, and Cabela's started what was called the North American Walleye Anglers, and they brought a bunch of money in. And my wife, Allie, talked me into doing it. She said, I think you can do this. We had two little girls. I didn't have really anything. And I said, all right, I'll go. I'll try it. Our very first event was down in La Crosse on the Mississippi River. I'm kind of a river rat to start, so it was kind of a good fit for me. I went down to my very first event down in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and took first place.
Oh man, right out the gate. So is that what would you say is your home body of water? You know, you talk about being a river rat. Is that kind of your little home area?
I would say the Mississippi River is probably one more up north in the Red Wing area. And then Mille Lacs Lake would probably be the other two. When we grew up, we had a grandmother that had a place on Mille Lacs, so we did a lot of fishing out there. And it just kind of got me started in everything. You know, I had parents that fished. I was blessed to be that way. And I've just been able to stay into this. So that year, I think it was 3 top 10s as professional rookie of the year. And again, all because my wife believed in me more than I did. I think you second guess yourself a lot. And when you got a good partner, they just kind of build up and tell you can do it. So that started me out in the industry. And, when you have a year like that, obviously the industry takes notice right away. So I feel like I said, I was pretty blessed. I was lucky. I'm not going to say that I wasn't. I hit the industry right at the right time and continued to do well. In 99, I was ranked number 1 in the nation. So I was Angler of the Year in 99. And then just continued to fish and really keep myself, I always tried to keep in the top 10. If you can keep yourself in the top 10, I always felt that you were in contention to win if you could do that. And I was pretty good at doing that, and you just, as the industry keeps going, they see you get more involved with that. You get some really good partners. And, I feel pretty lucky that I was able to go down that whole road and kind of get into it. And then at some point you just kind of say, maybe it's getting to the end and there's enough of this. And I think that's where, you start to age a little bit and the young guys can come up and, they're better at getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and staying out there in the dark. And I get a little tired out. Oh yeah.
Well, how old were you when you fished your first event as a pro?
I would say that was probably 94. So I would have been, where are we now? We're in 2018.
2019?
Yeah, so I'm 60 years old right now, so do the math. It was probably 20, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, you obviously did a lot of fishing before that came along. Talk about When did tournament fishing become a thing for you? Like, what was your first contact? Who were those guys when you were young and had stars in your eyes? What was that like?
Yeah, you're really going to age me now when when you ask me those questions. The guys when I was getting started were some of the names that everybody will know in the industry. So you had the Gary Roaches, Mike McClellan, Bob Probst. Perry Good was just getting started with me. Johnny Candle started when I started. So there's a group of us now that are kind of up at the top that were getting started at the same time. But those were really the people that you were looking at. And that was part of my problem when I got into it. I looked at these names and I go, I can't compete against those guys. No way. They're the masters of the world that do this stuff. And I'm going to go try and, beat them at their own game. And like I say, you got somebody who believes in you. They kind of build you up and you start believing in yourself, I think, a little bit. So those were the ones that were really getting started at that time. I played around in, little local tournaments on Mille Lacs Lake. Always did pretty well. And I think that's why Allie started to believe in some of the things that I could do. And like I said, we had 2 little girls at home. We really didn't have the finances. I set aside a certain amount of money. I said, if I run out, I'm just going to quit. Well, when you go to the first one and you win $10,000 at the first one, it kind of sets you up where you can kind of go for that first year. And I continued to do well after that and have enough money that I never took anything out of savings any year that I've ever fished. So,
man, that's so important. I mean, the recipe for success in this industry, whatever department you're in, a good support system at home.
Yep.
And that financial independence, because, I mean, it is what it is. It costs money.
It does. And it's, right now if you go to an event, you can figure on the walleye side, you're going to spend $3,000 to $5,000 per event. Is a pretty normal amount of money that you're going to be in there. So if you're doing, 5-6 events per year at that level, do the math. It gets expensive in a hurry. You're looking at $30,000 to $40,000, and you got some of these. I feel sorry for, some of the people. They're great anglers. One of the things you learn when you're doing this is you can be a really good angler on Mille Lacs Lake, but all of a sudden, my first trip to the Great Lakes, for instance, I go to Lake Erie, and there's a gentleman, he's passed away now, his name was Ricky LaCours, and I went out with him, and he kind of mentored me a little bit on the Great Lakes, and he said, Jimmy, one of the things you got to figure out is current. I'm like, current? Why would I have to worry about current in Lake Erie? He says, where do you think all that water from Niagara Falls is coming from? He said, you've got to figure out these currents and different things. So you get people like that help you, but, you can be a great angler on your home body of water, and all of a sudden you go to, we fished Lake Ontario, we fished Lake Erie, we fished out on Sacagawea, Mille Lacs Lake. You got all these different bodies, and you've got to be good at all of them. You learn a lot about yourself. One of the things I loved is just going to different bodies of water and seeing something. It's like going to North Dakota. Would I want to live there? No. Is it pretty cool when you get in the bluffs and be able to see, almost like a Black Hills type of thing? It is really cool. You see wildlife that you haven't seen before, waters you haven't seen before, and to try and figure out these fish and really try and learn and get better at, what you're trying to do. It's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. It's like going back in time. Yeah. I mean, I'm a North Dakotan. I love it out there. I grew up in Minnesota, and moving to North Dakota, exactly what you say. Yeah. It's like going back in time.
It is.
I really like it. But yeah, absolutely. And, you talk about, that first win as a pro.
Yeah.
In the 90s and now the technology that we have. Walk us through what it was like to win a tournament without side scan.
Yeah.
Or, or whatever. Give us that. Give us the play-by-play of your memory of winning that tournament.
Yeah. Well, so that tournament, that first one down on the river, there was a couple of things. It was a spring tournament, and the fish were in spawning in the shallows. And one of the things that you got to do is obviously just pay attention to everything that's going on around you. And there was a gentleman down there, Larry Erickson, that helped out quite a bit. I will mention that. But what happened is the DNR was actually doing trap nets, and they were pulling out big females and stripping their eggs and bringing them back. So I happened to be off on shore, and the DNR was doing some of this work. Well, you want to figure out where they are, right? And they're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
So they've got all these big female walleyes, and they're bringing them to the fishery, and they're going to strip them, and they bring them back to the water. But one of the things that I noticed is on their trap nets, they had bands of like the surveyor's tape. And they had little blue flags on everything. Like, that's interesting. So you go around the shore, and all of a sudden you start to realize that there's a little blue flag here. There's a little blue flag here. So that's where they were dropping their nets in. And that was their markers, so they knew where they were. Being a river rat, one of the things you learn is current seams, right? It's a pretty important thing when you're trying to do that. In the spring, the water's up. And when the maple trees start dropping, they drop these red buds. If anybody's ever had maples, they drop these red buds everywhere. There's a ton of maples on the river. And if you pay attention, what you'll see is they'll line up on these current seams. So inside, there'll be nothing. They'll be on the current seam, and then outside that current seam, the river's just ripping. So like the first day, I don't remember what I had for weight that was there, but came in and had a really good day. And then you go out second day, obviously everybody figures out where you are. And they are outside of these maple buds, and they're ripping down the river, and I'm inside the maple buds, and I'm just pitching a ringworm into shore and catching female fish that were in there. So it's paying attention is probably one of the biggest things. River, you don't use your electronics as much, certainly at the beginning. You look at some of the stuff that's out there now, and it helps you a lot. But when you started back in the 90s, the difference was you had to go find fish. There's a lot of really good fishermen out there right now. There's unfortunately not a lot of really good fishermen at finding fish. They're good at catching fish. They're really good at it. But the key is, you've got to be able to go find those fish. Before, it was experience, I think, more than it was electronics. Now, if you can learn to really pay attention to the electronics that are out there, I run the Garmin electronics and the live scope that's up front. Lawrence has got a live scope that's out there now as well. And learning how to read your electronics. And again, we were talking, we just had a wonderful dinner upstairs, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of conversation going on. And one of the things is how things have changed so much where before you might fish areas and spots, and now you actually fish one fish. Green Bay is probably a great example. When we were fishing out there, everybody used to fish areas, and you'd pull spinners, and you'd pull crankbaits, and do all this stuff. Well, now the electronics are good enough that you can go find one fish and try and catch that fish. So there's a lot more of jigging wraps, shiver minnows, spoons, snap jigging, but it's all around, one or two fish that are in a spot. We didn't have those electronics back there. The GPS were just starting to come out, and were fairly accurate and good to have. But you had to kind of go in there and figure out these fish and how to catch them. But it was more around finding fish than it was about catching fish. And that's, I think, what made some of these guys, like the Gary Roaches, the Mike McClowns and whatnot, so good, is that they grew up learning how to find fish. Jason's another great example of that. He knows how to go find fish. We're sitting on Gull Lake, and he probably hasn't fished Gull Lake a lot. And he can go out there and just find fish, right? I mean, we went out, he was doing a little bass fishing and, doing things that, he said he was fishing in some lily pads and stuff. I wouldn't have gone in there. I'd throw a frog if I was going to go in there. Well, he's got a little spoon that he's throwing in there. I mean, he's just a good hook that knows how to find fish and read an environment and be able to do that. And I think there's some of that that's been lost now because they rely on those electronics and unfortunately rely on, go by and hit a button when you're going by somebody else. So.
Yeah, and sometimes that, if you've come up through the ranks and over the years, sometimes it's hard to make that transition, but from what I've seen, Jimmy, you've been a great communicator in this industry for a lot of years, and you've made that transition, and now you're working with a lot of young people. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to say the least. 2 years ago, I had a really good friend of mine, Jason Barr, that lives in Brainerd here where we're at, And he decided that he was going to start doing some of the student angling stuff. And there was a team, his team, Brainerd Warriors. They started a little tour, and we had a good friend, Tim Bray. He created an app, and it started out that it was going to be all catch, record, release. And I helped him a little bit through that first year. Well, after that, we said, you know what? We got to take an opportunity here and really look and see, is there a demand where we can get more students out fishing? You know, that first year, 25 to 30 kids maybe or teams would come out and fish. So we decided to start the Student Angler Tournament Trail. This is our second year, and we decided to give it a try and see if we could give some of these students truly an opportunity to get out there. There's some amazing young anglers that are out there, and they've got the drive, and I see that, and I want to help in the worst way. It just makes you feel good to be able to do that. So last year we started a trail. We ran 5 events. We had, I think our biggest event was probably around 100 anglers, teams, which is, I think, pretty close at the time, probably a state record for that. Come into this year, just to give you an example of how things grow and how fast it can be, is we opened up, so we created a new website, and everything is electronic registration. And these kids obviously are really good at that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, they fit, you know, throw mom and dad off to the side, and when registration opens, those kids are going to get in there and they're going to make it happen. So we have an online registration form. We communicate with them and tell them exactly when it's going to open up. So our first event, we opened on a Thursday night at 6 o'clock. And that first event for Gull Lake, we had 100 teams, and we had that event up here, and we did it with the Minnesota Team Challenge. So normally we would have opened it up to 150. We filled 100 teams in 30 minutes at the first event. So that's 200 kids. The second event, which was for Minnetonka, we filled in 22 minutes. The third event, we filled in 19 minutes. Our fourth event, we filled in 9 minutes. 150 teams, 300 kids. We filled in 9 minutes. We actually worked with the DNR because if you think about that, you make one mistake on your registration and you're out. And we had parents that were trying to help, students that maybe made an error. And we said, you know what, our goal has always been not to leave a kid on the dock. We can't always do that, but we can sure try where we can. So we worked with the DNR. We actually buy permits for our tour. We do not have to. Since all of our kids are 18 years of age or younger, the Minnesota state does not allow you to have to purchase a tournament permit. But because we were so big, we thought we need to do that. The DNR needs to know when we're going to a lake. We don't want to show up and they've got another tournament and we come in there with 300 kids and 150 boat captains. Our last event that we just did yesterday was on Mille Lacs Lake. We had 380 students, 190 boat captains. We had approximately 500 to 600 people at our rules meeting. Just logistically, trying to make all that come together is pretty amazing. We've got a great board. I've got a young lady, Natalie Peterson, who helps us out, and she's just, I don't know what we'd do without her at the wheel of it, but it's really trying to organize all this and give these students opportunities. We still do catch, record, release. We allow the teams to leave from any ramp on the lake. And there's 2 reasons we do that. You know, obviously when you're fishing with the students, the first thing you want to make sure is safety, right? We don't want to put these kids in a bad situation. And I'll give you an example. Let's say we go to Mille Lacs Lake. We're running our event out of Izades down on the south end. And all these kids know that there's a great bite going up on Miramar on the north end. Well, if we've got a north wind coming in and these kids take off, they're going to try and go to that north end. So what we do is we allow them to go to any ramp, put on the water. At 7 o'clock, we turn the app on, and they got a boat captain that's in that boat with them, and they say, start fishing. So that allows somebody with a 14-foot boat to feel like they can compete just as well as somebody with a 21-foot bass boat, because it's not about speed and being able to run across the waves. They go out there, they can get on the water at 6 o'clock, idle out to their spot, sit there and go crazy. If you want to see excitement, watch these kids in the morning when they get to their spot at 6 o'clock. And they're sitting there for 1 hour in a boat.
So excited.
They are just wound tighter than a drum in there. And it's fun. You go to these rule meetings. We had the rule meeting at Izades on Mille Lacs. Like I said, about 500-600 people there. And they all wear their jerseys. Lund allows me to work a program with them. We did, I think, 970 jerseys for students in the high school teams this year, which is pretty awesome. I mean, that whole Brunswick group, I know that Jason's part of the Crestliner team. They've got a bunch of things going on as well with high school angling. But to see all these kids in their jerseys, standing there at a rules meeting, and they are just jacked up like you can't imagine. They are excited.
Yeah, I mean,
it's pretty cool.
It's definitely making an impact. There's no question about it. When you're there and you're looking, who are these kids? Is it local kids from the area? Does it draw from the people come to these things and the boat captains? Is it all just parents? Or how can, if you're somebody hearing about this for the first time, or you've been hearing about it and you maybe want to support it, is this something that talk about that a little bit?
That's a great question. So here's what happens. So I'll give you an example again. Our last event. So when we've got 190 teams, the furthest north team that we had is International Falls. They come to just about every event. They send probably 4 or 5 teams down for each event. Furthest south that we got is Owatonna. We've got kids from North Dakota that are fishing it. So it's a statewide type deal. One of the things that's impressed me tremendously with these students is, if you think about fishermen just as a whole, they're pretty motivated individuals, right? They may be up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to go fishing. They're going out and competing against fish that they can't see, so they're trying to figure something out, so they're really good problem solvers. And they've got this motivation. And I'll use an example. I went to a meeting in Brainerd year before last. Went up to speak to their team. Jimmy Linder was there. And it was their spring meeting. So they have an ice fishing thing that they do all winter, these teams. So they're typically with high schools, but some of them are just individual teams. The high school doesn't want to be involved, so maybe there's a parent that started something and there might be 30 kids that are in this team. Out of those 30 kids, maybe only 10 of them fish tournaments. So they got all their club events. They've got events where they've got pros coming in and telling them about how to do certain things. They start up stations where learn how to tie this knot, learn how to tie this knot. So it's not just the tournament side that you're trying to touch. You're trying to touch these kids that are across everything. But you take these individuals, when we were at Brainerd, for instance, and they had a event, and what they do, and I think it's pretty cool, is they have inches for fish, right? So the biggest northern, biggest walleye, biggest crappie, whatever it may be. So you might catch 28-inch walleye during the winter, and that's what your score is. But if you got a perfect attendance, you get 2 more inches. If you've got a straight A average, you get 2 more inches. And there was a young man there, and Jason called him up. And what they do is they bring them across the stage and talk about all these kids. And the kid had won the largest, I believe it was walleye the year before. But he got beat out by another gal that had like a 26, and maybe he had a 28, but she had perfect attendance and a 4.0. So he comes to the second year, he wins. Guess what he's got?
Straight A's.
Straight A's. He wanted those extra 2 inches on his card. So these are kids that are very motivated and typically some of the top students in the school. They may not play baseball, they may not play hockey, they may not play another sport. But now all of a sudden they've got a sport that they can be involved with. They have their jerseys, just like the other teams have got jerseys that they can wear. And they all of a sudden have this sense of belonging with the school that maybe they did not have before. The great part to go with that is the colleges have figured this out. So now all of a sudden the colleges are looking at these students, and the colleges have fishing teams, and they're not looking at them because they know they're a great angler. They're looking at them because they know they're a great student. And when they get involved with the school, they know that they're going to be the ones that are going to graduate. They know that they'll probably graduate with a 4.0, just following that same pattern that they had before. So all of a sudden, these students that maybe were kind of off to the side all the time are becoming a highlight for these new schools. Bemidji State is a great example of that. There's a guy, Mike Mulry, that's up there, and his whole goal is to try and get these anglers to come to their school. And again, not because of just the fishing program, but because he knows that they're going to be great students and they're going to turn around and really make an impact in our world. And that's when you look at this whole thing. Yes, we're helping anglers. Yes, we're helping students. But we're helping create kids that are really going to make an impact, I believe, whether it be in the fishing industry, might be business, might be marketing, who knows. But it's pretty cool to kind of watch that whole thing kind of transpire. As far as kids getting started, it's pretty simple, to be honest. It's driven a lot. I will tell you there are more moms that start teams than probably dads.
Really?
Yes.
What's the deal there?
I think, in a lot of cases, maybe the guy's the one that's, full-time job or whatever it is. But I think the kids can talk mom into it easier than they can talk dad into it.
Yeah, probably.
Right?
Yeah. Dad, can I go fishing?
Yeah.
Well, you got your chores to do,
Yeah.
But mom, she'll give you a...
So they help get these teams started. We got a Wyzetta team. There's a gal named Krista Ice down there that started that. But there's, the Brainerd team here in Minnesota, I think they're about 120 kids in that whole program. Minnetonka's probably at about 100 and some kids. So it'll vary from, I think St. Francis we just helped start, and I think they've got 4 students in St. Francis, Minnesota. So it doesn't matter how big or small you are. The boat captains are probably the biggest challenge. Because from a safety perspective, we got to have an adult in the boat. And that adult does not fish. They can help net fish. They can help make suggestions on changing baits or locations. But in general, the students kind of like to make those choices on their own. We don't make it mandatory that they can't ask for help or do things. But trying to find enough boat captains, let's talk about Mille Lacs again with 190. So you got to find 190 volunteers that have boats. I would say out of those 190, maybe half are parents. The rest are professional anglers, guides, friends, mom and dads. So if you look from an industry perspective, when all of this was starting, everybody, at first they got involved because they felt like they had to. Everybody else is jumping on the ship. We got to jump on the ship. We got to help. And they wondered if it would actually make an impact. They thought the college anglers was really the place to invest because, they're older, they're going to buy stuff. But here's what happens. When the college kids go to college, mom and dad kind of want to wash their hands a little bit and aren't going to invest. What we're seeing in the industry is with the students is multiple things are happening. One, license sales are starting to increase. They were on a steady decline, so they're slowing down. They're not up above, but they're slowed down. And then it's re-engaged, I'd say, a generation that we kind of lost, that we're out for technology and all this other stuff, right? So you had this technology boom that came in, and everybody was on their phones and playing the games and doing all the other stuff. But all of a sudden, the new cool thing is not technology for these kids because they grew up with it. It's normal for them. There's nothing new and cool about technology. What's new and cool is the outdoors. So now we've got these kids that want to be involved with the outdoors, and they're pulling their parents back in. So that generation that we lost are now coming back in. They were fishermen before. They just kind of stepped away from it. But now they're coming back into that whole group again. So we've got this whole group of parents and relatives that are buying used boats, buying new boats, buying fishing equipment, buying fishing licenses, and doing all these things that are going to help our industry and all our partners grow. And that's really one of the great side effects. Now, people like Lund and Crestliner and all the others that get involved aren't necessarily doing it just for that reason. They're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. And if there's a side benefit with that, great. And we are starting to see it. I mean, we've got some great dealerships, Rapid Marine, all these different groups that are around there, and they're seeing sales increases for sure. And they've got programs for the students where you can get a discount if you're on a team or a coach. Lund's got one, Crestliner's got one. And these programs are starting to get used. And these dealerships are starting to go, hey, this is making an impact in our industry. So we're doing all the right things. We're giving opportunities that are tremendous to these students. And it's just fun to see it continue to grow. I mean, I don't know where it goes, but I think there's still a lot left that we can do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's obviously, in a few short years, just making a tremendous impact, and it kind of has to market itself, right? I mean, there's probably a lot of people that are not very far away from it that maybe don't even know all these things, right? So it's just, getting the word out and, bringing people together and communicating together. It's only a matter of time. And, we're talking about how much it's grown to this point. But realistically, Jimmy, in a couple of years, we're going to look back at this and these are going to be small numbers.
It is. And there's still a lot of things. So one of the things here in Minnesota that we've been doing is working with the Minnesota State High School League. So if you follow in the footsteps of the Trap League, which has had unbelievable growth in the state of Minnesota, you look at what's happened. I don't remember the latest numbers, but it's over 18,000 kids involved in trap shooting in Minnesota. You look at 18,000, not even a injury anywhere, and they were able to do this. Now, there's a gentleman, Jim Sable was the guy that kind of pushed that through. With me coming up and trying to work with the Minnesota State High School League, guess who I talked to? Jim Sable, right? Say, okay, what happened here? He said, the first thing you'll learn, Jimmy, is everybody tell you that we were an overnight success with the Trap League. He said it took us over 6 years to get it approved through the Minnesota State High School League. Now, having a Trap League is a lot more politically motivated than fishing, right? So we sat down. I've actually presented to the board for the Minnesota State High School League 2 different times. Dave Stead was the original executive director. There's a new guy, Eric Martins. So we were making great progress. Then Eric took over and still making great progress. Great guy, but he just wanted to, it's a brand new job for him. He needs to go out and kind of get his hands around and figure out what's all going on. We've got a meeting that we're supposed to set up over the next couple of weeks with him. We're hoping he's going to come. We've got a what we're calling a state championship this year. What I mean by that is each team will be able to send 3 two-person teams. So if you're the Brainerd team, you can send 6 kids to the event, and any other school can do the same thing. And we're going to run a 2-day event where they actually combine their weights. And we're doing it for a couple of reasons. There's a guy, Gordon Fothergill, up in Grand Rapids that brought the idea up to me. He said, typically these kids are all competing against each other, so why don't we have a state championship where they learn to work together, share information, figure out patterns, see if that pattern can be expanded to another place in the lake, and just give them a different avenue that we can do that. So that's a great idea. Well, what we've done is invite Eric to come to that event up in Grand Rapids. We'll run a 2-day event on Pekegama in Grand Rapids and try and get him to see what we're doing with all this. He is very intrigued. He knows what's going on. He's very on top of what we're doing. And we believe that we'll be able to get this into the State High School League. We will not run it as a sanctioned sport. We will run it on what's called a sponsored sport, same as the Trap League. The difference is that we have a lot more flexibility on a state-sponsored sport than a sanctioned. For instance, if we wanted to do a morning prayer before everybody left, we can do that. If they want to wear jerseys with sponsors, we can do that. So we got a lot more flexibility if we do it as a state-sponsored sport. And then what happens is you've got a qualification process that you would go through. And at the end of the year, the Minnesota State High School League sponsors the state championship. And that's what they mean by a sponsored sport. So we've sat down with them. We've gone through eligibility requirements, rules, everything. And we believe that if we can get it into the high school leagues, then to your question before is, there's probably a lot of people that don't even know this exists. Well, if all of a sudden we can get it into all the high schools, now all of a sudden everybody's going to know.
Yep.
And you're right. 2 years from now, we're going to turn around and go, are we at 15,000?
Yep.
Versus, maybe we'll be a couple thousand students this year that we'll push through here.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
wow.
in Minnesota wouldn't be the first state in the union to come up with fishing in high schools. There's plenty of examples, and it seems like it's pretty clearly a success for the kids that are participating in it.
Yeah, it is, and the State High School League obviously sees that, right? I mean, their goal is much the same as ours, and it's academics, it's competition, it's all these things that we want to promote just as much as they want to promote. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't see that it's not going to happen. It's just how long. One of the things Jim Sable told me is, Jimmy, patience is going to be your friend on this whole thing. They've got a lot. Part of the challenge, if you're an athletic director, say, for one of the schools, you might have 20 or 30 sports that you've already got to deal with. The great part when you come in with a state-sponsored sport like we are, we're going to handle most of that weight, right? So the Student Angler Tournament Trail can help do that. They see that we've got, we got a website, mnsatt.org. We are a 501c3. So we've got all the kind of that infrastructure that needs to be in place already. Can we handle something as big as this? We'll stumble, right? And we tell people that we're going to make mistakes, but then what we're going to do is we're trying to fix those and move on like any good organization or business would.
For sure.
Yeah, right? So you got to just be honest with the people. The parents are great. The kids are amazing. Do we have problems? Yeah, we do, like anything else. But it's a very small percentage of everything. You go out and we had 190 boats on Minnetonka, and probably 189 of them had the time of their life. So yeah. That's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, and we're talking about open water fishing. Getting into high schools, is this something that winter time? What's the future really look like? Maybe there's opportunity. Is it a year-round thing, or is it just fall? Is it just spring? What does your vision really have for this future?
Yeah, good questions, and they're all different. So my vision, certainly, I look at it from an open water perspective, and I'm going to talk about the ice fishing because that's just me when I'm looking at the SATT. Is once we get established in Minnesota, and now we're on our second year and we're growing like gangbusters, it's crazy how much growth that we've got, and we're being able to handle it, is to find somebody probably in Minnesota that can take over. So I kind of run the day-to-day operations of it all. If I can find somebody to take that piece, then I can go to Wisconsin, start it in Wisconsin, get it going. So in Minnesota for the SATT, we've got mnsatt.org. We've also got the domains for wisatt.org, iowasatt.org. and start expanding into some of the other states that don't have the same type of opportunities that we do. Then what happens is you've got all of these teams that are out there. You know, we talk about Brainerd, Minnetonka. We've got a bunch of clubs out in the heart of the lake, so kind of that Alexandria area. Everywhere throughout the whole state is these teams start to put together their programs. And they're not just doing it in the summer. They're doing it in the winter as well. So they keep these kids engaged from summer to winter through ice fishing events and everything else. So logically, you would assume, okay, if we're going to do ice fishing, should we start to hold some SATT.org ice fishing events that go along with that? I believe that will come. I know that the teams are doing it already and having great success with it. They do same type of thing, catch, record, release on the fish. They do it with many times inches, and they do, how can I explain it? So, you know, maybe a 14-inch crappie or points, let's call it points. So a 14-inch crappie might be worth X amount of points. 28-inch walleye might be X amount of points. But it's not just inches. So, you know, you don't want to go out there and have everybody trying to catch pike and walleyes. I want to make sure that, you know, a 14 or 16-inch crappie, you've got as much points as you do maybe for a 26-inch walleye. So they start to do this point system during the winter, which works out really cool because it allows you to do multi-species on everything. We use an app from Classic Bass for our CRR. The DNR loves it. The Minnesota State High School League loves it. They catch that fish, they weigh that fish, they take a picture of that fish, and they immediately release it right back where it was before. So we're not transporting these fish across the lake. The same thing's happening in the ice fishing stuff. So I think you're gonna see it continue into the ice fishing as well. You look at the explosion that we've had in ice fishing over the last 5 years, it's astronomical. All these kids that are fishing during the summer, guess what they're doing during the winter?
They want to go fishing.
Correct.
Yep. And the technology advances, you know, we talked about, you know, earlier talking about tournaments and things like that. I mean, everybody has an equal chance to learn what it is. You know, the younger crowd, the millennials, the young kids, you know, kind of get hashtagged, you know, with liking technology or whatever, you know, but there's aspects to it. But you know what? Like, it's an even playing field when everybody can learn that stuff. But it just clicks, you know, and I see it, you know, with just, you know, kids that we run into, whether it's at work or just my own, you know, just friends, kids, whatever, my niece and nephew, you know, people around you, they just like to go fishing because they like to see that red line, you know, flashing in front of them, you know, on the ice, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, the kid that, you know, you couldn't throw out in 30 below weather because they had a video game to play, you know, and you know, they look at you like you're crazy. All of a sudden now they're standing at the door wearing their snow pants like, let's go fishing. Yeah. And that's the way it was when we were little kids, you know, but you're right. It was just you know, it just seemed like, you know, that participation level with, you know, tag sales or, you know, license sales in the Midwest, you know, took a little dip. But, you know, I think that as the future goes, the way this industry goes, hopefully it's just a blip on the radar. And guys like you are just doing things that are going to bounce this industry back and maybe take it places it's never been. For sure, it just looks like, you know, the demand, the movement that's happening with these young kids is really cool. And as the years go by, you know, this could be it. I mean, you know, the next Jimmy Bell could be some kid that's looking up to you right now, and you just don't know which one he is. Yeah. You know, but that's just an absolute reality. And that's really, really cool, man. Well, I tell you what, I know you got to drive home. I do. So, dude, thank you so much for this awesome information. And you know, where can people find you? Let's, you got Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Where are you at? Yep, we've got, so Student Angler Tournament Trail is what you're actually searching for. So Facebook, Instagram. We've got a website, as I mentioned, mnsatt.org. All the board members are listed on there with our email addresses. Anybody, anytime, can email me at Jimmy, Jimmy, .bell, Bell, at studentangler.org. I would love to talk to anybody. I don't care if they're in Minnesota, Dakotas, wherever it may be.
we will help them in any way that we can. Get a team started if they want to start a whole trail in their state, whatever they want to do, we're here for them. It's a lot of work, but you feel pretty blessed when you come out of it and you see what it is. You mentioned I'm at a point where I'm not fishing the national trails anymore, any of that. So I get to do this, and it feels pretty cool.
You're the man, Jimmy. Awesome to meet you, man. Thanks for being on the podcast.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the JMO Podcast. Head on down to the comment section. Let us know your thoughts, and if there's anything you'd like to hear on a future episode, we'd love to hear about it.